Lane.
Here.
Councilmember Bragg.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Spriggs.
Here.
Mayor Janney.
Here. We have one item left on our agenda this evening, item 6.3. Mr. Wade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. As you know, the city currently prohibits large-scale medical marijuana dispensaries. However, the advocates of a petition to allow medical marijuana dispensaries have gathered enough signatures that were certified by the city clerk to place an initiative on the ballot to allow them under an ordinance that they've drafted. I'm going to turn the matter or this report over to our city attorney to give you details, and after which I will provide some additional information.
Thank you, Mr. Wade. Honorable Mayor and members of the council, item 6.3 before the council tonight is the certification by the city clerk that sufficient signatures have been gathered by the proponents of an initiative regarding medical marijuana dispensaries. Therefore, tonight the city council will consider the next steps in the initiative process. By way of background, as Mr. Wade explained, the city of Imperial Beach adopted a set of ordinances in July of 2011 which prohibit medical marijuana dispensaries that involve 4 or more persons. Subsequent to that approval, and in March of this year, the proponents took steps to qualify an initiative for the ballot. The proposed initiative, as submitted and as is an attachment in your staff report, would repeal the city's current ordinance, and it would replace it with a new ordinance which would allow dispensaries to locate, for example, in the C1, C2, C3 zones in the city. It provides for the issuance of a city business license and various other operating requirements as detailed in the initiative. Since the City Council considered medical marijuana dispensaries last year, the state of the law is not any clearer. The staff report contains a discussion of state and federal law, and I would be happy to answer questions from the council if you have questions on those issues. Federal law remains the same, which it doesn't recognize medical marijuana. So tonight, council has 4 options. Option 1, approve the ordinance as it is written with no changes. There would be no need to go to the ballot if the council chooses that option. Option 2 is put it on the ballot for November of 2012. It would be submitted to the voters as it is written. No changes can be made. If more than 50% of the voters approve it, then it would be submitted to the California Coastal Commission before it could take effect. So if council chooses option 2, the resolutions have been drafted. They are attached. They would call the election, set the priorities of written arguments, and authorize rebuttal arguments. The third option is to request that staff draft a report on the initiative and the effects of the initiative. And the law requires it be back to the council within 30 days or less if the council chooses. And then the fourth option before the council tonight is to consider whether or not the city wants to submit a competing ballot measure. And obviously that would come into play if you were going to submit it to the ballot. If council is interested in that option, staff would need direction about a competing ballot measure. Mr. Wade prepared attachment 8, which is a map of the areas where dispensaries could locate under the proposed initiative. And I will turn it over to him to show that map and just give an explanation under the proposed initiative where dispensaries can locate. After that, we would turn it over to the council for discussion. We would be happy to answer questions about any of the options as the discussion progresses tonight.
Thank you, Ms. Lyon. The ordinance as drafted states that medical marijuana dispensaries would be allowed in commercial, mixed-use, or industrial zones appropriate for retail or healthcare. We have no industrial zones in the city of Imperial Beach, and what you see in front of you are our commercial zones. The C1 is the large area to the upper right, top, and the C2 zone is along the coast. The ordinance also specifies that mixed-use zones would be allowable, and both those zones, the zone designated areas in blue, include mixed-use overlay zones. Moving to the southeast, you see a small little blue area at the corner, the northeast corner of 9th Street and Imperial Beach Boulevard, and down at Iris and 13th Street, and then also at 13th Street and Imperial Beach Boulevard. As drafted, the ordinance says that medical marijuana dispensaries could not be located within 600 feet of a school or within 300 feet of another such establishment. The only school within 600 feet of any of our commercial zones is Central Elementary School, and as you see on this exhibit, the 600-foot radius is drawn to show where medical marijuana dispensaries would be prohibited if this ordinance went into effect. That area, that sort of, I'll call it magenta area, would be the area restricted and not allowed to have a medical marijuana dispensary, and the rest of the blue area would be permissible. Given the size of our commercial zones, and again, the ordinance stating that a medical marijuana dispensary would not be able to, would have to be given a business license unless located within 300 feet of another such establishment. Well, I haven't put in those parameters into the zones. The C1 zone, which again is the larger area in the top, is approximately 5,000 feet long and about 1,400 feet wide. You know, if you just estimate out, that's approximately, you know, assuming the market was there, about 17 to 18 dispensaries could theoretically be located in that zone, depending upon need. In the Seacoast area, the C2 and mixed use 2 zone along the beach, that area would allow somewhere in the neighborhood of 8 to 9 such facilities. And in the C3 zone, it would be limited to 4, the C3 zone being the area next to the Central Elementary School. Again, that's just a very basic mathematical equation, but that's our analysis at this time of if the ordinance were to be in effect.
Is that clear? I'm going to take the liberty at this time to start the discussion from council. A little disappointing. I thought the council made a correct decision when they enacted our previous ordinances, because our ordinance does allow for a collective of 3 persons or less. It's not a ban, as some people might have called it. But that being said, and all the different other things that I think are wrong in this initiative, some of the terms, some of the conditions, I do believe people collected signatures. I think people have the right to vote here in California. And I'd like to make a motion for further discussion to adopt the recommendation under number 2 with the 3 resolutions, 2012-7231, 2012-7232, 2012-7233, and put this on the ballot in November and let all the people of Imperial Beach have a chance. I do have a second for Mr. Bilbray on that item, and it is now up for discussion of council first. That's my position on it. Thank you. Mr. Spriggs.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would have preferred we had an opportunity to discuss all the options before you're coming down so strong on that one, but I think that's all fine. I had a couple questions I wanted to ask regarding option 4, and one of them has to do is sort of a legal question, and the other one I think is a map question for Mr. Wade. No, it's on, but it's not talking to. Okay. So the legal or technical question on option 4, which would be if the council put forth an alternative measure on the ballot. The question is, I think the report reads that the measure that garners the most votes would take effect, but that needs some interpretation. So there's 2 measures. Let's say one measure is defeated by 3,000 to 2,500 votes, and then the second measure wins by 2,000 to 1,500 votes. So the measure that wins has less yes votes than the measure that loses. So what do we mean by the most votes in this situation?
Elections Code 9221 reads that if the provisions of two or more ordinances adopted at the same election, so they both received a majority vote of the people, conflict, the ordinance receiving the highest number of affirmative votes shall control. So the one that had the highest number of yes votes would control.
Assuming that there's more yes than no votes in that measure.
Right, because it has to.
Excuse me, folks, I mean, if we're gonna get through this, there's a lot of speaker slips here, there are a lot of people that wanna have their thing. If we wanna have conversations from the audience, I would just call it repeated recesses, and we'll be here for a long time. Thank you.
So both of the measures would have to, if one received a majority vote and the other did not pass the 50 plus 1%, the one that received the majority vote would win. If both of them receive at least 50% of the vote, 50 plus 1, then you go to the highest number of affirmative votes. So if the yes votes on the first one was 3,000, and that's 50 plus 1, then that one has the most affirmative votes to approve the ordinance.
Okay, thank you. The second question, again regarding that fourth option, would be if we were thinking about an alternative measure that might include in it some of the provisions that this one is missing, that the mayor alluded to, is unfortunate that it's missing. For example, perhaps some distance restrictions away from parks. Let's just say hypothetical, sort of like our last proposal months ago, there's a 600-foot park restriction, radius restriction. What would the map look like in that instance? Is there any way, Mr. Wade, you could answer that off the top?
Mr. Spriggs, I really couldn't answer that without taking a detailed analysis. Obviously, if we had a competing ballot measure with different locational criteria, the map would change. As you may recall, when looking at the county's adopted regulations, when applied to the city of Imperial Beach, there was no area in our city that would allow them, mostly because of the locational restrictions away from residential zones. And in our city, our commercial zones being relatively small, most residential zones are right against them. So just looking at parks, I couldn't say for sure, but obviously the more locational criteria you apply to the restriction of, or the location of medical marijuana dispensaries, the smaller the area becomes. So it would, if it was the council's direction to devise a competing ballot measure that would support medical marijuana dispensaries but have more locational restrictions, we would absolutely provide an exhibit that would demonstrate where they could be located.
Thank you, Mr. Wade.
And before, I wanted to clarify my position when I made that motion. On the options, we had one for reports. And because we've looked at this thing prior to enacting the ordinance that are presently in place, and including with this agenda item, I think that asking for a report, and that's why I went and supported item number 2, was just asking for staff to produce more paper saying the same thing, because nothing has changed. The city attorney did mention it's still not legal within federal law, state law, in 15 plus years. Haven't made up their mind what they're doing in California, and I doubt they'll do it in the next 60 to 90 days, so I don't think that would change. The item that Mr. Spriggs brought up, and I personally gave it a lot of thought, was for us to submit a counter initiative or ballot thing, but the real thing is, what I believe we adopted when we had the ordinance in place was what was appropriate for Imperial Beach. And just because some folks have got together, put together an initiative now, I'm not going back on what I think we did was right for here, because it is, as Mr. Wade said, if we adopted the county regulations at the time, there would be no place, and that's what we saw. We were not limiting access, we actually increased the amount of people that we allowed in these small collectives, and we just don't have large collectives. And 3 people seemed very appropriate at that time. So that's why, so to clarify for my colleagues, why I put out option number 2 right off the bat is I weighed a lot on this, talked to attorneys, I've talked to other cities, and that's what I think is something that's workable for here in Imperial Beach. I wish there was a process where we could line items, such as somebody up in Sacramento gets to do once in a while, pieces of the present initiative that we might not like, and still give them what they're wanting, but that's not within the legal part that we're allowed to do, so that's where I'm at. I'm sorry, I should have explained that further in the very beginning. Mr. King?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm in agreement with you. That is the decision I came to in terms of having this go to the ballot. I share your views on this very, very closely in terms of I don't think that originally that the state law was very explicit or clear on how it defined collectives or it defined cooperatives, and I noticed cooperatives wasn't in this particular recommendation here. However, I don't see the point of going through the same things that we've already gone through. We've turned over all the information, we've turned it upside down. You know, it comes down to democracy. In California, it gives us the initiative process, and it's direct democracy. And I think that it's, you know, in line with what was originally undertaken by the people who got this on the ballot in the state. So I support putting it on the ballot.
Thank you. I wanted to point out, and I'm in total agreement with my colleagues, I wanted to point out why I couldn't support the initiative. And there were 3 reasons that I highlighted in there, and it was to be approved without size restrictions in mixed use, prohibits city officials from denying a business license to any applicant unless the proposed dispensary is within 300 feet from another one, and maintaining minimum interior lighting standards. And if you were here when we had another item on our agenda, and it was an adult establishment, and they had exterior lighting in both the front and the back, and also cameras. And I asked, was that a requirement? But no, it was not, but it was something the applicant had taken upon themselves. And I found that very beneficial, I think, for our community to have the exterior lighting. That's why I could not support the initiative. I'm in total agreement with my colleagues, so take it up, put it on the ballot.
Yeah. Under the process before us, I do have quite a few speaker slips from folks that are in support of, basically, I guess it was item 2, which is put it on the ballot. And I do have several speaker slips that were in support of number 3, which is the report. I explained my position on the report, but I'm going to first start and ask those that are proponents, if you would like to speak, all of you, or do you want to designate a specific speaker? Because there are terms within our code as far as where I can limit. I cannot individually pick any one of you out and say you can't speak, but because of the large amount of people, I can limit the amount of time. So it might be to your advantage to have a designated speaker. That is on the proponent side. And then there appears to me to be 6 or 7 that are proponents of putting a report out there. I don't see it being a real group, one person donated to another. With that being said, amongst yourselves, which way would you like to go?
Question.
Sir, could you please come up to the microphone? You do have a speaker slip. I'll start your 3 minutes.
No, I just have a question for you, actually. I'm sorry, but I'll come up